welcome to the Art of Being Human. On the last segment, I started talking about personality. I didn't quite finish, so I'm going to finish today and then move on to personality disorders. I really felt you needed to have the background information on personality and personality development before I go into the personality disorders, which are really quite prevalent and I think quite important in terms of your understanding yourself and in terms of understanding other people. I think a knowledge of personality disorders will be a help to you. So let me just finish up what I had to say on the personality. What I wanted to mention is that if a child is molested for any number of years or for whatever reason, if a child is molested, their emotional development stops at the age that they are molested. So for example, supposing a child, a girl child, is molested at age 10, which happens fairly frequently, and unfortunately, at age 10, they stop their emotional development. And what happens is they continue at age 10, unless healing is occurring because they're in some kind of therapy. The body and the emotions are at an age 10 level. The body will continue to develop, the mind won't continue to develop. So when they get to be teenagers, when they get to be adults, they really have a case of seriously arrested development emotionally. That won't change unless healing occurs. So you can't expect that a child that has been molested and grows up, maybe it gets out of the molestation, they're not going to act like an adult. They're going to act at the age where they had the molestation because they will not develop beyond that point. And another thing I wanted to mention to you is that just because you understand a problem does not mean that you're healed from it. You know, I talk to a lot of people who know so much about their past. They know about their problems. They can analyze their problems to death. They know what happened. They know why it happened, but they're not healed from it. And how do I know? They continue to talk about it over and over and over again, like it's so fresh in their minds, they've never forgotten, they've never put it to rest. They think they're healed because they understand the circumstances. They think they're healed because they understand what went on, but they're not healed because they have to keep going back to it all the time. So to get healing, you've got to go a lot deeper than just understanding what happened. Now, I think the understanding is important. It's a very important first step toward healing, but it's not complete healing. You have to go deeper and somehow redirect yourself, reintegrate yourself, but that requires therapy, and it requires a person to do it who knows what they're doing so that they can gently lead you to have your personality kind of reconstructed to be who you are and lose all of the awful symptoms. So the healing goes deeper than just the understanding of a problem. We also have to remember that physical conditions can affect a person in their personality development. For example, is the person autistic? Because if they have a brain disorder and the scans of the brain of the autistic person is not the same as the scans of a brain of a normal person. The brain scans are different. What if the child is partly deaf? What if the child has a hearing disorder or a vision disorder or both? What if the child is handicapped? What if the child has any kind of an unusual illness? That's all going to make a difference in the personality development. And if you look back in your own life, you look at what you've been through, what kind of illnesses have you gone through? Do you have some kind of a learning disability? How has that affected you? Most people who have learning disabilities end up by feeling like they're not very bright. But usually they're very bright. Having a learning disability does not affect the general IQ. There's just a certain segment of learning you just cannot master, and that's where the disability is. Even Einstein had a problem with learning. He couldn't learn certain things. He couldn't do things verbally or writing. Actually, people thought that he was retarded, but he's one of the most brilliant people that ever lived. But he had a learning disability. So if you have a learning disability, it doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. It means that you learn in a different kind of way, and in order to learn, it has to be presented to you in a different kind of way. The classes that you take take for you to learn, but it doesn't mean that you're not very intelligent. So you need to understand, though, that's going to affect your personality, because you're going to grow up thinking, well, I can't do this, I'm dumb, I can't understand this, and you really can be very, very brilliant and still have a learning disability. So you just need to get that into perspective. You have to understand that personality is actually quite complicated. Two people can act the same way for different reasons. Two people can act differently for the same reason. There is a complicated thing about personality. We cannot judge other people. People perceive in different kinds of ways. I'm not going to perceive things the way that you do. You're not going to perceive things the way that I do. Yet at the same time, there's a closeness in perception, so that if I mention certain things, you understand them. You mention certain things, I understand them. So there's an overlap. Supposing you have two circles, you are over here, I am over here. At some point in the middle, we overlap and we can understand each other when we're talking to each other, but our perceptions won't be the same. If I were to say to you, close your eyes and imagine a tree, everybody's going to say, if you did this, you close your eyes and you imagine a tree. If you were to describe to me the tree that you imagined, then none of the trees would be alike. Someone's going to imagine a maple, someone's going to imagine an evergreen, somebody's going to imagine a tree with orange leaves like in the fall. Some people are going to imagine like a dogwood with flowers in the spring. No one is going to perceive exactly the same, and yet at the same time they're all perceiving a tree, but their version of a tree. And that version is not going to be the same as my version. Now, does it matter? It really doesn't matter, because we're all perceiving, but we're just doing it in an individual way. That's part of our personality too, since the personality is the sum total of everything about you. And if we're to understand each other, we have to know how each other is perceiving. What's important to you might not be important to me, but what's important to you has to be important to me if I'm going to be helping you, or if I'm going to be talking with you. An adult child talking, and when you talk with your child, you have to understand how your child is perceiving. Because of the fact that the brain has not developed and won't develop completely until mid-20s, what your child is perceiving is going to be on their age level, appropriate for their age level, but not appropriate for yours. So you can't just think that your child is thinking the way that you're thinking. They can't do it, because the brain's not there yet. So you have to kind of get on their level and find out how they're feeling and what they're thinking, and then go with that. Then they'll feel understood. One of the therapeutic things that we do is Rogerian therapist. If you understand that term, Rogerian had a type of therapy where you reflect what another person is saying. You're not saying the same thing, but you're saying almost the same thing, but at a deeper level. So if a child comes up to me and says, I can't stand school, I don't want to be in school anymore, and I'm just kind of making this up out of my head as I go along. I'm not talking about any specific case that I've dealt with. But if a child comes to me and says, I can't stand school, I hate it, and I don't know what to do, you know, I just want to quit, I don't want to have anything to do with school, I hate people, and I can sum that all up, and I can say something like, well, you're afraid that you're not accepted, that people don't accept you. And if I've hit it right, the child will say, yeah, that's right, I never thought of that. Or they might even say, as one child did say, bingo, you got it. So what I'm doing is I'm taking what their perceptions are, and I'm going to a little deeper level and putting it together for them, and then they understand that and they see that. But I can't do that if I don't know where they're coming from and what their perceptions are. So as they talk to me, I learn where their perceptions are. And then as I learn where their perceptions are, I can pull it together and I can reflect what they're saying, not in the exact words, although I may use some of the exact words, but in their feeling tone. If somebody says, I can't stand my girlfriend, she doesn't like me, and I say, well, you think that she doesn't accept you for some reason, that there's something wrong with the relationship because she's not accepting of you, and if I get it right, they'll say so. They'll acknowledge that, because it's almost a surprise to them when they learn, oh yeah, that's right, I never thought of it before. That's kind of like the core of reflective counseling that's in the Rogerian style. And although I use it some, I've used it some, but I'm more eclectic. I use a lot of different theories, not just one. But you see, if you understand where a person is coming from, you can say things that make sense to them, that help them, because you're speaking from their frame of mind, not your own. Now, this requires considerable training. You just don't do this on your own without learning how to do it, learning how to do it right. That's why knowledge by itself isn't enough for healing. That has to be brought to a different level where the brain is kind of reconstructed emotionally, where things fit together differently. And of course, you have to teach a person, if they've been hurt, they have to forgive. That's the way they heal. They cannot heal without forgiveness. So it is important in terms of personality to have some kind of a unity with the person that you're dealing with, to understand where they're coming from and do it in a very non-judgmental manner. You're not out there just to force yourself on somebody else. You're out there to try to help a person understand where they are and where they're coming from. And then you can help to change them, and then you can show them new things that maybe they've never known before. So I just wanted to bring that up. So we don't judge other people, and we do perceive in different ways. So our personalities are based on our own physiology, our own experiences, and our perceptions, both of ourselves and of others, and how we feel that other people are perceiving us. And that gets a little complicated, but that's what it is. Now I'm going to go from this to personality disorders. I'm going to define it for you first. A personality disorder is a lasting, enduring way of perceiving and feeling that is long-lasting, rigid, not creative, and that lasts throughout a person's life and seems odd considering what people are like in our culture. And you've probably met some people that are very rigid in the way that they think, in the way they talk, in the way that they feel. They may well have a personality disorder, but this is what you need to know. These patterns of behavior are lasting. They're not movable. They don't change. It's hard to treat a personality disorder because sometimes they are so odd. The people seem rigid, they seem odd, they seem counterproductive, they seem to be in trouble, they don't seem to be able to make friends, and it becomes very distressing to them. And it also can be debilitating because they can't function in a normal way because they're at odds with the rest of people in society. Now, that doesn't mean we can't hold our own personal philosophies. I could have a certain personal philosophy. I'm a Christian, and I hold that very dearly. I don't have any trouble dealing with other people, and they don't have any trouble dealing with me. But some of these personality disorders are just so rigid, you can't say anything to them, or they blow off the handle. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel they can relate to other people. It gets to be a real problem. So let me read this off to you. Again, just to kind of put it in perspective, and a lot of this I'm taking from the DSM, which is used in diagnosis for people with mental problems. A personality disorder is a lasting or enduring pattern of behavior and feelings, and what the DSM would say, it has to do with inner experience. It's enduring, and it has to do with inner experience. That's your feelings and your emotions. That is much different from what you would expect in the culture that we are living in. Okay, the pattern of behavior is rigid, it's long-lasting, it's pervasive, and it begins in adolescence or young adulthood. Now, I believe it starts a lot earlier than that, but it becomes, I think, much more obvious in a young adult or in a teenagerhood. And what it is, it becomes so rigid and stable that it leads to distress of the individual. Now, let me just go to this chart and show you a couple of things, and I'm going to go into some of the personality disorders. It starts early in life. There is inflexibility of thinking. It affects personal relationships. The thinking is exaggerated. The thinking is rigid. It ranges from being eccentric to being completely dysfunctional. The cause, I think, is rejection as a child or poor bonding. Now, 2 segments ago, I believe it was 2 segments ago, we did a whole section on bonding experiences and attachment disorders. And what I said at the time is that if a baby cannot bond with their parents, they just don't have it, they just can't be close with their parents, then what's going to happen is they're going to grow up not being able to relate to other people. And I think myself that that's kind of a part and parcel of what happens in a personality disorder. Now, it may not show up as a personality disorder at the time that it's happening, but Freud believed that the basic personality patterns are laid down by age 5. And although I'm not a Freudian and I wouldn't practice a psychoanalysis, I have some issues with that, but at the same time, he was right about some things too. And I think the basic personality patterns are laid down very, very young, because how do you relate? You relate to what you do with your parents, how your parents respond to you. And if your parents are cold and your parents don't want to bother with you very much, then you feel that, you cut yourself off, and then you become very dependent upon them because, as I've explained before, we become very dependent on people if we're insecure. If a baby doesn't feel secure with their parents, if a young child does not feel secure with their parents, then what's going to happen is they're going to hang on for dear life because they want the security, they need the security, and they're asking for it, but they don't know how to ask for it. But it shows in their behavior, and then the parents just kind of reject that out of hand, and they don't get what they need, so they search for it more. And instead of being glad to leave the parent, they hang on to the parent more. So it has kind of a reverse effect. So it ranges, as I said before, from being eccentric to being completely dysfunctional, and the cause, I think, is rejection as a child, poor bonding, and they don't develop social skills that they need to develop. Now, there may be some medical issues as well, but this is a general rule of thumb. The progression would be a child misbehaves, and it leads to rejection by schools or other children or the parents, and so they make friends with other children that have similar problems to themselves. Have you ever wondered, you know, a child that goes into a school and bombs it or tries to shoot it up, or the violence that we see today, which is just terrible, who do they bond with? Other children that have the same problems as themselves, because they didn't have good bonding experiences with normal parents. This is what I believe at any rate. And so what happens, they bond with other people that have the same problems as they have. And then it's easy for them to become radicalized. It's unfair. I didn't get treated fairly. The kids don't like me. I'm going to make them pay for it. I know just how I'm going to do it. I'm going to build a bomb. I'm going to put it in the school. I'm going to just get rid of all my aggression that way. And they may not quite physically, they may not quite emotionally figure all of this out, what the psychodynamics are of it, but they know that they're angry because they're not accepted. And what really happened early on in their life is they did not have proper bonding experiences with their parents. They could not attach. Whether it was due to some fault of their parents, the parents were cold and rejecting, or whether it was something within them. They had a medical issue that was maybe undiagnosed, or they were just not able to bond for some reason. Now, I want to mention this before we go, because I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying here. If a person is shy and retiring, it doesn't mean that they have a personality disorder. It just simply means they're shy and retiring. A lot of people, a lot of children who have problems with violence, they're loners, they stay to themselves, they don't have any friends, but they're in a different kind of space than a child that's just shy and retiring. You know, who has a personality disorder? Well, supposing that you have a medical issue and you're worried about it. You've got pains and you never used to have pains. You have some symptoms that you're not sure about. That does not make you a hypochondriac, and it doesn't make you have a personality disorder. But if you have a little scratch on a finger and you decided that maybe it was terminal cancer and you worried about it incessantly, and I could look at it and say, well, it's just a scratch, but that wasn't good enough, you might be a hypochondriac. You might have a personality disorder. It has to do with the reality of it. It has to do with the depth of it. We cannot ever judge people because we cannot perceive exactly like they do, and we just have to understand that people who have certain characteristics may or may not have a personality disorder. And I'm going to close it here because we're running out of time, but I'm going to get back to this next time. And what I'm going to do is make it clear to you what a personality disorder is, how it affects people in their life, how it can lead to bullying, how it can lead to social violence, because really that's what we're trying to get at, to stop the violence, to understand it, and to put a stop to it. So I will close here, and we'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.